I understand now. They were never planning to come back. No, this can't be happening. Who is this? What have you done? Why would you do this?
The first thing I noticed was my photograph. It was the picture Claire had taken at my 68th birthday dinner 3 weeks earlier. Beneath it, bold black letters announced that I, Frances Bennett, had died after a long and private struggle with dementia. My hands went cold. Hundreds of people had already left condolences. A donation page had collected thousands of dollars. But the worst part was at the top of the screen. My daughter had shared the obituary the night before writing, "Rest peacefully, Mom." I did everything I could. I was alive. I was fully aware. And suddenly I understood why Claire had worked so hard to keep me away from home. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child announced your death while you were still alive? Also share where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing who is listening to my story. 3 weeks before I found my obituary online, I still believed my daughter was trying to protect me. That was the cruelest part. For nearly 40 years, I had worked at the Richmond Ledger, first as a copy assistant and eventually as a features editor. I became the person families called when they needed help putting a life into a few hundred words. I edited more obituaries than I could count. I knew how death was described when people wanted the truth softened, and I knew which phrases were meant to discourage questions. After a long and private struggle was one of those phrases. When I saw those words beneath my own photograph, I understood that whoever had written the notice knew exactly what they were doing. But before that morning, I had never thought of Claire as someone capable of planning my disappearance. After Robert died, she became more present in my life. At first I was grateful. Grief changes the shape of ordinary tasks. A bill that once took 2 minutes to pay could sit unopened because the name on the envelope reminded me of the person who used to handle it. Grocery shopping hurt because every aisle held one of Robert's habits: his coffee, his mustard, the cinnamon cookies he claimed were for guests. Claire stepped into those empty places. She brought casseroles, changed the smoke detector batteries, and sat at my kitchen table, organizing insurance policies and emergency contacts. When I cried, she held my hand. "You spent your whole life taking care of everyone else," she told me. "Let me take care of you now." I believed her because she was my daughter. At first, her help felt loving. She set up automatic payments for the electric bill and drove me to appointments. Then the help began to feel like supervision. If I said I had paid a bill, Claire checked. If I mentioned lunch with Ruth, she asked where, when, and what time I would return. If I did not answer my phone immediately, she called again and sent Emma to text me. I noticed, but I explained it away. Claire had lost her father. Perhaps fear had made her cling too tightly to the parent she still had. 6 weeks before the obituary appeared, I slipped on the back steps after freezing rain. I did not lose consciousness or break a bone. I landed on my left side and sprained my wrist. Claire arrived at urgent care before the x-rays were finished. "You could have died out there," she said. "I fell 2 steps, sweetheart. You were alone. I have lived alone for 3 years. That does not mean it is safe." The doctor told me to rest my wrist and call if I developed dizziness or worsening pain. I was embarrassed more than injured. Claire acted as though I had survived a catastrophe. 2 days later, she returned with Derek in a folder. Derek placed it on my kitchen table. He owned a construction company and spoke as though every conversation were a negotiation he intended to win. "This is only practical," he said. "Nothing changes unless there is an emergency." Inside was a durable financial power of attorney. I read it carefully, or at least I thought I did. My wrist throbbed, Claire kept crying, and Derek repeatedly assured me the document was standard. "What emergency are we imagining?" I asked. Claire knelt beside me. "Another fall, a stroke, surgery, anything that leaves you unable to pay bills for a few weeks. I am not unable now. No one is saying you are. but they were already beginning to say it without using the words. Claire reminded me that Robert had managed many of our investments. She said banks could become difficult if something happened, and no one had authority to act. She promised the document would never be used without my permission. I signed. The memory of that pen touching paper later made me feel sick. In the following weeks, Claire took over more than I believed I had authorized. She asked for my banking passwords in case the website locked me out. She redirected statements to her home because she claimed mail theft was increasing. She created a new email address for medical appointments and said she would manage it. When I objected, she smiled. "Mom, you asked me to help. Had I?" At the time, I kept surrendering small pieces of control because each one seemed too insignificant to fight over. One password, one stack of mail, one appointment. Nothing looked dangerous by itself. Then Claire began telling stories about my memory. At Sunday dinner, she laughed and said I had asked the same question 3 times. I had not. I asked whether Emma's school play was Friday or Saturday because Claire gave me 2 different answers. At the pharmacy, Claire told the clerk I sometimes became confused by instructions. The pharmacist had printed the wrong dosage. When I misplaced my reading glasses and found them in the bathroom, Claire stared at me. "You should mention that to your doctor. People misplace glasses. You have been forgetting more lately." She said it calmly, not accusing, not worried, prepared. 3 weeks after my fall, Claire suggested I stay with Ruth for a while. Ruth lived outside Richmond in a quiet cottage near a lake. Claire described it as a chance to recover without stairs or household chores. "You and Ruth can drink tea, watch old movies, and gossip," she said. Ruth had already invited me, so the idea did not seem suspicious. I packed enough clothes for 2 weeks. The morning Claire drove me there, she insisted on taking my laptop. "You need a break from screens." She also took my spare house key. "I'll water the plants and bring in the mail." At Ruth's cottage, my phone began behaving strangely. My banking application rejected my password. My email signed me out. Several calls from friends never appeared in my history, though they later insisted they had tried to reach me. Claire blamed the rural signal. Then she told me not to worry about anything at home. "I have it handled," she said. Sitting beside Ruth's window with my obituary glowing on the phone, I finally heard those words for what they were. Not comfort. A warning. I thought about the redirected mail, the changed passwords, Derek's legal papers, and the way Claire had slowly taught people to question my memory. The fall had not started the plan. It had only given her an excuse to accelerate it. Sending me to Ruth's cottage had never been about helping me recover. Claire had needed me out of my house. For several seconds, I sat frozen at Ruth's kitchen table, staring at the sentence my daughter had written beneath my obituary. "Rest peacefully, Mom. I did everything I could." The words felt less like grief and more like a declaration of victory. Ruth came around the table and read the screen over my shoulder. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Frances, this has to be some terrible mistake." "No," I whispered. "A mistake does not collect donations." The memorial page showed $7,430 raised in less than 12 hours. Claire had written that the money would cover medical expenses, private nursing care, and a small family service. The comments praised her devotion. "You gave your mother everything. She was lucky to have you. You carried such a heavy burden with grace." I recognized names from Church Robert's former colleagues and neighbors who had known me for decades. Each message made me feel more invisible. I pressed Claire's number. The call went directly to voicemail. "Claire, this is your mother." My voice shook. "I am looking at an obituary that says I am dead. Call me immediately." I hung up and called again. Voicemail. The third time, I did not leave a message. Ruth sat across from me, pale and silent. She knew better than to tell me to calm down. Calmness was not the absence of fear. It was what you built around fear when you could not afford to collapse. I called Derek. His phone rang twice before the line disconnected. When I tried again, I received a recorded message saying the number was unavailable. "He blocked me," I said. "Then call someone else," Ruth replied. "Find out what they have been told." The first person I contacted was my cousin Margaret in North Carolina. We spoke every few weeks, although we had not talked since I went to Ruth's cottage. Margaret answered in a tired voice. Hello, it's Frances. Silence. Margaret. The sound that followed was not a word. It was a sharp breath, almost a cry. Who is this Frances Bennett? No. Her voice turned hard. This is cruel. It is really me. My cousin died last night. I did not die. Claire called me herself. My stomach tightened. What did she say? Margaret began crying. She said you passed away at a private memory care facility. She said you had declined quickly and did not recognize anyone at the end. She told me there would not be a public funeral because you wanted something quiet. I gripped the phone until my wrist ached. I have never lived in a memory care facility. Margaret sobbed harder. I asked her a question only the two of us could answer, what we had hidden beneath our grandmother's porch when we were 9 years old. A blue cookie tin, she whispered, with 3 marbles and that awful picture of Uncle Warren. It is me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Margaret said, Frances, what is happening I do not know yet. That was the truth, and saying it frightened me more than the obituary itself. I asked Margaret not to call Claire. I needed time to understand what my daughter was doing before she learned I had begun asking questions. The next call was to Elaine Porter, a woman who had worked beside me at the Richmond Ledger for 22 years. Elaine answered while crying. I heard other voices in the background. We're at the office, she said after I convinced her it was really me. Some of the old staff came in when we heard. We were going through photographs for a tribute. A tribute. People were already organizing my memories while I sat alive beside a half-finished cup of coffee. Who told the newspaper? I asked. Claire sent the notice early this morning. She said the family had approved it. That detail struck me with particular force. Claire had not simply posted an emotional message online. She had formally submitted my obituary to the newspaper where I had worked most of my adult life. She knew they would trust her. Did anyone speak to a hospital? I asked. No. Claire said privacy laws prevented the facility from releasing information. Of course she had. Every part of the story had been designed to stop questions before they were asked. I called 2 neighbors, a former pastor, and Robert's younger brother in Maryland. They all repeated variations of the same story. Dementia, private care, sudden decline, no public service. With every conversation I heard, Claire's language spreading through my life. She had not only announced my death, she had explained my silence in advance. If I had called people sounding frightened or confused, they might have believed it was evidence of the illness Claire had described. If I appeared at my own home, Derek could claim I had wandered away from a facility. The thought made the room seem smaller. Ruth must have seen the realization on my face. What are you thinking? She has made the truth sound like proof that I am sick. Ruth reached across the table. Then we document everything. That was why she had been my friend for 41 years. She did not offer empty comfort. She gave fear a task. I took screenshots of the obituary Claire's post, the donation page, and every comment that mentioned the story Claire had told. Ruth wrote down the names and times of each person I contacted. Then I called Emma. The first call rang until voicemail. I did not leave a message. If Claire was controlling Emma's phone, I did not want to alert her. I waited 10 minutes and tried again. This time someone answered, but no one spoke. Emma. A faint breath came through the line. Grandma. Her voice was so quiet I barely heard it. Yes, sweetheart. It's me. Oh, thank God. The relief in those 3 words almost broke me. Where are you? She whispered. At Ruth's. Are you safe? I think so. What do you mean you think so? I'm upstairs. Dad is downstairs. Where is your mother? She went out with someone from the bank. I looked at Ruth. Emma, tell me exactly what happened. There was a pause followed by the sound of a door closing softly. Mom told everyone you died last night. She said it happened at a private facility and that you didn't want people to see you when you got worse. Did she tell you that I was in a facility? She told me not to ask questions. Did you believe her? No. Emma's voice cracked. I called your phone, but Mom said she had turned it off. Then I saw the obituary. Why didn't you tell anyone Dad took my car keys? He said I was upset and not thinking clearly. Derek had used the same language on Emma that Claire had used on me. What are they doing at my house? Emma did not answer immediately. Sweetheart, don't come here alone. Cold moved through my chest. Why? There are people in the house. A woman with a real estate badge came this morning. Dad showed her every room. He kept talking about how fast they could close if they found a cash buyer. My eyes moved toward Ruth, who was already writing. And the other people movers, I think. They're carrying boxes into a truck. What boxes? Your books, dishes, things from Grandpa's office. I stood so quickly that the chair scraped across the floor. I'm coming home. No, Emma's whisper became urgent. Grandma, please. Dad said if you showed up, they had a plan. What kind of plan? I don't know. I only heard part of it. A man's voice sounded faintly in the background. Emma stopped breathing. Is that Derek? Yes. End the call. Delete it from your history. Grandma, am listening. Her next words came out in a trembling rush. They already put price tags on Grandpa's things. The line went dead. I remained standing with the phone pressed to my ear. Robert's desk, his watch, the old record player we bought during our first year of marriage, the fishing rods he had promised Emma, the wooden box containing every letter he wrote me while serving overseas. They were not just selling furniture. They were dismantling my life before anyone could discover I was still living it. I looked at Ruth. Get your keys. She did not ask where we were going. She already knew. Ruth drove faster than I had ever seen her drive. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. The only sounds inside her old Subaru were the tires humming against the highway and the steady clicking of my fingernails against my phone as I refreshed Claire's obituary post again and again. The number of condolences kept growing. Someone had written, Frances always made everyone feel welcome. Heaven gained a wonderful soul today. Another read, Claire, your devotion to your mother was inspiring. I stared at those words until they blurred. People were mourning me. People were praising my daughter for surviving a tragedy she had invented. Ruth finally broke the silence. We're not rushing into that house. I have to stop them. You have to know what you're walking into first. My husband built that house. And that's exactly why we have to be smart. I hated admitting she was right. For 39 years, Robert and I had poured ourselves into that place. It wasn't a mansion. It was a comfortable colonial home in Richmond, with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and an old oak tree that Robert refused to cut down because Emma had hung her first swing from one of its branches. Every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas morning, every goodbye, every memory lived inside those walls. If Claire and Derek were dismantling it piece by piece, I needed to understand how much damage had already been done. As we entered Richmond, I instinctively reached for my purse to retrieve my house keys. Then I remembered. Claire had taken the spare key the morning she drove me to Ruth's cottage. At the time, she had smiled. I'll water your plants. Now I wondered whether she had ever intended to give the key back. We're almost there, Ruth said quietly. Don't pull into my driveway. She nodded. Instead, she parked 2 houses away beneath a large maple tree. From there, I could see nearly everything. At first glance, my house looked almost normal. The flower beds were trimmed, the porch lights were off, the curtains were open. Then I noticed the garage door. It was halfway open. Inside stood a folding sign. Property available, private showings only. The sign hadn't been placed outside yet. It was waiting for me to disappear completely. My pulse hammered in my ears. A silver SUV with a real estate company's logo sat in my driveway. Behind it stood a white moving truck. 2 men carried boxes through my front door. One box split slightly as they loaded it. Books. My books. The leather-bound dictionaries I had collected throughout 40 years in publishing. Robert had bought the first one on our honeymoon because I had jokingly complained that hotel dictionaries were too small. I still remembered laughing. Now strangers were carrying it away. Ruth raised her phone. I'm recording. So am I. I zoomed in. Another man emerged carrying one of Robert's fishing rods. Then came framed photographs, my wedding portrait, Emma's kindergarten graduation picture, a painting Robert's mother had finished only weeks before she died. They weren't packing for storage, they were emptying the house. A woman wearing a navy blazer stepped out onto the porch. She held a clipboard and spoke briefly with Derek. Even from a distance, I recognized him. tall, broad shoulders, always dressed like someone trying to look wealthier than he really was. He pointed toward the backyard while smiling. The woman nodded and scribbled notes. "A realtor," Ruth whispered. "I know." I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced myself to keep recording. Emotion would not help me. Evidence would. Just then, another vehicle slowed beside the curb. A familiar man climbed out carrying a grocery bag. Luis Alvarez, my next-door neighbor. He had lived beside us for nearly 20 years. Robert used to help him repair fences every spring. Luis looked toward my house, frowned, then noticed Ruth's car. His eyes landed on me. For a full second, he didn't move. The grocery bag slipped from his hands. Oranges rolled into the street. He walked toward us as though he had seen a ghost, which in his mind he probably had. "Mrs. Bennett, it's me." His face turned completely white. "No, I'm alive." He looked from me to the obituary still open on my phone. Claire said. "What exactly did Claire tell you?" Louise swallowed. "She came over yesterday evening." He leaned against Ruth's car as if his knees had weakened. She was crying. "What did she say?" "She said you passed away peacefully at a private care center." The exact same story. She thanked everyone for respecting the family's privacy. I closed my eyes. Louise continued. "She asked whether I would keep an eye on the house until everything was settled." "Everything?" He hesitated. I thought she meant probate. Of course he had. That was what any reasonable person would think. "When did the realtor arrive?" "This morning." "And the movers?" "A little after 9. Luis looked toward my house again. "I thought it was fast." "So did I. But Claire said you had already planned to sell after—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I never listed this house." "I believe you." His voice was immediate, without hesitation. "I believe you because you're standing here." He looked devastated. "I should have called someone." "You had no reason to doubt my daughter." He lowered his head. "I still feel like I failed you." I placed my hand gently on his arm. "No. The people who lied failed us." A loud laugh drifted from my backyard. Derek. Even from across the lawn I recognized it, confident, relaxed, as though he had already won. Ruth zoomed her camera. "The realtor is going inside again." I watched Derek unlock the front door. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He walked in exactly the way a homeowner would, because he believed he already controlled everything. Suddenly, another vehicle arrived. A delivery van. 2 men unloaded several flat cardboard boxes. The realtor signed for them. "What are those?" Ruth asked. I adjusted my zoom. The printing on one carton came into focus. "Open house signs." My breath caught. They weren't preparing to discuss selling my house. They were preparing to advertise it, immediately, while the world believed I was dead. "We need to get closer," I whispered. "No. If they sell the house, they haven't sold it yet." "How do you know?" "Because they're still measuring." She pointed. The realtor carried a laser measuring tool into the dining room. Professional listing photographs had not been taken. The furniture remained inside. There was still time. Maybe. A sudden movement upstairs caught my attention. Someone stood behind the guest room curtain. Emma. Only part of her face was visible. She looked terrified. Our eyes met. For just 2 seconds. She lifted one hand slightly, not waving, warning. Then she disappeared. My heart pounded. Emma's still inside. "I know. We have to get her out." "Not yet." Ruth grabbed my wrist before I could open the car door. "Frances, I can't leave her. You also can't help her if Derek calls the police and tells them an elderly woman suffering from dementia has wandered back home." The sentence hit me like ice water. That was exactly what he would say. The obituary, the memory care story, the false narrative, it all fit together. If I burst into my own house screaming that I was alive, Derek could calmly tell responding officers that I was confused, that I had escaped from supervision, that I didn't understand reality. People would see an older woman yelling while everyone else insisted she was ill. For the first time in my life, I realized how easily truth could lose to confidence. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered immediately. Hello? No one spoke. Then I heard breathing. Soft. Shaky. Grandma, Emma. I'm using my friend's phone, she whispered. I only have a minute. I'm outside. I know. You saw me. I saw your car. Are you all right? No. A door slammed somewhere behind her. She spoke even faster. They're taking Grandpa's office now. My chest tightened. They already packed his desk. What else? The safe. What safe? The wall safe behind the bookshelf. I stared at the second-floor window. Robert's office. There was indeed a hidden wall safe. Almost no one knew about it, not even Claire. At least, I had always believed she didn't. What happened to it? Dad found it. Every muscle in my body froze. He opened it. I don't know. Emma's voice trembled. But I saw papers. What papers? I couldn't read them. She swallowed. And Grandma? Yes. They're saying you're moving into a memory care home on Thursday. I closed my eyes. Thursday. There was already a date. They hadn't simply told the world I was dead. They had prepared a future in which if I somehow reappeared, they could claim I belonged somewhere no one would question. The obituary had never been the end of their plan. It had only been the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Ruth insisted I take her guest bedroom, but I spent most of the hours sitting in the living room with a legal pad, a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, and every screenshot we had managed to collect. For 40 years, my career had depended on one simple rule: facts before feelings. It was advice I had given dozens of young reporters. Never assume, never exaggerate. Build the story, one verified fact at a time. By sunrise, I had written down everything I knew. Fact number 1. Claire had publicly announced my death. Fact number 2. She had described me as suffering from dementia. Fact number 3. She had convinced family, neighbors, friends, and even my former newspaper that I had died in a private care facility. Fact number 4. Movers and a realtor were already inside my home. Fact number 5. Emma had confirmed that plans existed to place me in a memory care facility on Thursday. Everything else remained unanswered. How much authority had Claire already gained? How much money had disappeared? Could she legally sell my house? Or was she hoping no one would question anything because dead people didn't object? At 8:30 that morning, Ruth drove me to my bank. The branch manager, Susan Reynolds, had known Robert and me for nearly 20 years. She attended the same church and had once asked me to edit her son's college application essay. When she saw me walk through the front doors, the color drained from her face. Mrs. Bennett. Good morning, Susan. She stared for several seconds. I thought, I know what you thought. She immediately led Ruth and me into her office and quietly closed the door. I received flowers from your daughter this morning, she admitted. What kind of flowers? A sympathy arrangement. I laughed. It wasn't because anything was funny. Sometimes pain escapes through laughter because tears aren't large enough to carry it. Susan looked horrified. I'm so sorry. I need you to tell me something. She nodded. Has anyone accessed my accounts? Susan hesitated. Mrs. Bennett, please. She turned her computer monitor slightly away from Ruth, then entered several passwords. As she reviewed the account history, I watched her expression slowly change: confusion, concern, then alarm. There have been several transactions. What kind transfers? How much? Susan swallowed. Approximately $183,000 over the past 18 days. The room became completely silent. I heard Ruth whisper, Dear God. Where did it go? I asked. Susan clicked another screen. The transfers were authorized using your power of attorney. My stomach dropped. Claire. Every document I had signed after my fall suddenly came rushing back. The destination account. Susan looked again. Bennett Family Care, LLC. I've never heard of it. It appears to be a limited liability company. Who owns it? I'm not permitted to say unless... She stopped speaking. Then she looked directly at me. Actually, she stood. Stay here. She disappeared into another office. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying a thick folder. I've spoken with our legal department. She sat carefully. Because you are physically present and your identity has been confirmed, I can disclose information relating to your accounts. I nodded. The LLC is jointly registered to Derek Hale and Claire Hale. My chest tightened. So my daughter transferred my money into a company she owns with her husband. Susan looked miserable. According to these documents, she slid several pages across the desk. The transfers were described as payments for long-term elder care planning. I examined the paperwork. Every transaction carried my electronic authorization. Except, I never approved these, Susan pointed gently. The approvals were executed under your durable financial power of attorney. I closed my eyes. Claire had promised she would never use it unless there was an emergency. Apparently, my fictional death qualified. Ruth leaned forward. Can those transfers be reversed? Susan answered carefully. They can be investigated. What does that mean? If fraud occurred, yes. If, Susan looked apologetic. Legally, Mrs. Bennett voluntarily granted financial authority. I granted authority. I lifted my eyes. I did not grant permission to steal. Susan nodded. I understand. She pressed a button beneath her desk. A few moments later, a fraud investigator named Michael entered carrying additional documents. For the next hour, I answered every question they asked. Did I authorize these transfers? No. Did I know Bennett Family Care LLC existed? Num. Did I understand the power of attorney when I signed it? I believed I did. Had anyone pressured me at the time? I had said no. Now I wasn't sure anymore. Michael requested copies of the obituary screenshots and every text message from Claire during the previous month. As he reviewed them, he frowned. This timeline concerns me. What timeline? The transfers increased immediately after your obituary appeared online. Susan turned another page. There are additional withdrawals scheduled. Scheduled, she nodded. Automatic transfers. How much? Nearly $90,000 over the next 10 days. If we had waited, Ruth whispered, they would have emptied everything. Susan looked directly at me. We can freeze future transfers immediately. Do it. I'll also flag the accounts for suspected elder financial exploitation. The words hit harder than I expected. Elder financial exploitation. There it was. A phrase I had edited in newspaper articles dozens of times. I had never imagined becoming the subject instead of the editor. Before leaving, I asked one final question. My house. Susan frowned. What about it? Can Claire borrow against it? She checked another file. There is already activity. My heartbeat quickened. What kind of activity? A home equity line of credit. I never applied for one. It appears to have been opened 12 days ago. 12 days, using your power of attorney. How much? $400,000. Ruth covered her mouth. I couldn't speak. The equity Robert and I had spent decades building. The security we intended to leave Emma. It had become another source of cash, another asset waiting to be consumed. Susan quietly handed me another document. The first page listed several recent disbursements. Construction suppliers, commercial loan payments, vehicle financing, business debt. None of it had anything to do with my care. They weren't preserving my future. They were rescuing Derek's failing company. I suddenly remembered something Robert had said nearly 2 years before he died. Derek spends money like tomorrow owes him a favor. At the time we had laughed. Robert rarely criticized people. If he noticed someone's financial habits, they had to be extraordinary. I should have listened more carefully. As we prepared to leave, Michael stopped me. Mrs. Bennett. Yes. I recommend speaking to an attorney today. I already planned to. Make it immediate. Why? He hesitated before answering. Because someone has already filed paperwork claiming you may no longer be competent to manage your own finances. Every sound inside the bank disappeared. What paperwork? I can't access the court documents. But our legal department received notice yesterday. Susan opened another file. It references an emergency guardianship petition. My knees weakened. Ruth caught my elbow before I lost my balance. A guardianship? Susan nodded slowly. If the court approves it, she couldn't finish. What happens? I asked. You could lose legal authority over your finances. And my home, potentially. My medical decisions. She lowered her eyes. Potentially. The obituary, the memory care story, the drained accounts, the realtor, the moving truck, now an emergency guardianship. For the first time, I saw the entire picture. They weren't simply trying to steal my money. They were trying to erase my legal existence while I was still alive. If the court believed I suffered from advanced dementia, Claire wouldn't need to pretend anymore. She would control every decision I made, where I lived, who I spoke to, how my money was spent, whether anyone was allowed to see me. My obituary had never been written for the dead. It had been written for the living. It was designed to make the world stop looking for me. Ruth reached for my hand. We're going to find a lawyer, I nodded. Today. Because somewhere, perhaps at that very moment, my own daughter was asking a judge to decide that I no longer had the right to speak for myself. Daniel Mercer had aged, but his eyes hadn't changed. They were the same calm gray eyes that had looked across our dining room table more than 20 years earlier, when Robert and I signed our wills. Daniel had always spoken slowly, as though every sentence deserved careful construction before it entered the world. When Ruth and I walked into his office, he rose immediately. Frances. He stared for a moment before stepping around his desk. I received Claire's email yesterday. I imagine everyone did. His expression tightened. She informed me that you had passed away. I'm afraid the reports were exaggerated. He didn't smile. Instead, he embraced me. Only after we sat down did I realize how exhausted I felt. For the next 45 minutes, I told Daniel everything. The obituary, the memorial donations, the realtor, the movers, the drained bank accounts, Emma's warnings, the emergency guardianship petition. Daniel listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he folded his hands. This is far worse than I expected. You believe me. Frances, I've known you for 30 years. He opened a yellow legal pad. I also know Robert. I lowered my eyes. He trusted you. He did. Daniel hesitated. And he worried. Worried about what? He looked toward the office window. Your son-in-law. The word surprised me. Robert never said anything. He didn't want family conflict. Daniel leaned back. But during the last year of his life, he asked several questions about protecting your estate. What kind of questions? He wanted to know how durable powers of attorney could be abused. A chill spread through my chest. He suspected Derek. He suspected Derek's financial judgment. Daniel chose his words carefully. He never accused him of a crime. But he believed Derek lived beyond his means. I remembered Robert's comment in the bank. Tomorrow owes him a favor. At the time, it had sounded like nothing. Now it echoed differently. Daniel pulled a thick legal folder from his cabinet. I've already requested copies of the guardianship filing. You have? The clerk emailed them this morning. He slid the documents toward me. The petition named Claire Hale as the proposed guardian of my person and my estate. Reason for emergency intervention: advanced cognitive decline, increasing confusion, financial incompetence, unsafe wandering behavior. I stopped reading. My own daughter had signed every page. I've never wandered anywhere. I know. Daniel turned another page. This concerns me more. Attached to the petition were 6 color photographs. One showed me standing beside my mailbox looking down the street. Another captured me sitting alone on a park bench. Another showed me searching through my purse outside a grocery store. The captions beneath each image described bizarre behavior. Subject appears disoriented. Subject unable to remember destination. Subject confused and wandering. I stared at them. I wasn't confused. I know. The grocery picture. I pointed. I was looking for my shopping list. Daniel nodded. And the park. I was waiting for Ruth. The mailbox photograph suddenly came back to me. Claire had insisted on taking pictures because she thought the afternoon light made the neighborhood beautiful. She hadn't been photographing memories, she had been collecting evidence, or what she hoped would look like evidence. Ruth shook her head slowly. My God. Daniel continued turning pages. There are also written statements. From whom? A neighbor you've barely spoken to. A pharmacy technician. A volunteer at church. I skimmed them. Each described small, ordinary moments that had been twisted into signs of dementia. Frances forgot where she parked. She repeated herself during Bible study. She looked confused while shopping. One incident stood out immediately. A church volunteer claimed I had forgotten the date of Easter. I smiled despite myself. I was arguing that Easter changes every year. Daniel looked up. What? The volunteer insisted it was always on the same weekend. Ruth actually laughed. It was an argument, not memory loss. Daniel wrote another note. Good. Good. Because facts dismantle stories. He closed the folder. Claire built a narrative from isolated moments. He tapped the papers. Our job is to restore context. Before I could answer, his assistant knocked. The courthouse called. Daniel accepted the note she handed him. His eyes narrowed. The hearing has been moved forward. When? Tomorrow morning. So soon? He nodded. Emergency petitions move quickly. I looked at Ruth. 24 hours. That was all we had. Daniel stood. We're not waiting. He picked up the phone. I want an independent cognitive evaluation today. Haimada 2 more calls. Then another. Within 20 minutes, he had arranged appointments with a neurologist, a psychologist, and an internist who specialized in competency evaluations. I'll attend each appointment. Is that necessary? Absolutely. If the court sees 3 independent physicians agreeing, you're fully competent, Claire's story weakens dramatically. We still have the financial theft. One battle at a time. The medical evaluations consumed the rest of the afternoon. The neurologist asked me to remember words, solve simple calculations, identify current events, draw clocks, and explain abstract sayings. The psychologist asked about Robert, my childhood, my finances, and my daily routines. The internist reviewed every medication I took. By evening, I felt mentally drained. Daniel gathered the preliminary reports. Excellent. What do they say? They all agree you appear fully oriented. For now. The formal reports arrive tomorrow. Relief flooded through me for the first time since reading the obituary. Then Daniel's phone rang. He answered quietly. His expression changed almost immediately. What happened? He asked. A pause. I understand. He ended the call. What is it? I asked. The court received additional evidence from Claire's attorney. What evidence? A physician's letter. My stomach dropped. I haven't seen a new doctor. You didn't. Daniel rubbed his forehead. The letter states you suffer from significant cognitive impairment and no longer understand complex financial decisions. I stared at him. That's impossible. I agree. The doctor has never examined me. I intend to prove exactly that. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with quiet conversations. I had walked into courtrooms before as a juror. Never as someone whose own child was trying to convince a judge I had lost my mind. Claire stood near the front beside Derek. She wore a navy dress. Her eyes looked red as though she had spent the night crying. The moment she saw me, genuine shock flashed across her face. She hadn't expected me to appear. Then almost instantly her expression changed. She hurried toward me. Mom. She wrapped her arms around me before I could react. Oh, thank God. I remained perfectly still. She began crying loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. I've been so worried. Daniel gently stepped between us. My client prefers not to be touched. Claire looked at him with wounded disbelief. She's confused. No, Daniel replied calmly. She's represented. Claire turned toward the judge's courtroom doors. Mom wandered away. I went to visit a friend. You forgot to tell anyone. I told you exactly where I was going. Her face tightened for a fraction of a second, then she recovered. You don't remember. Derek stepped forward wearing his most sympathetic smile. This has been heartbreaking for all of us. I looked directly at him. Has it? The hearing began minutes later. Claire testified first. She spoke softly. Sometimes she cried. She described finding unpaid bills. She claimed I forgot meals. She insisted I believed Robert was still alive on certain mornings. Every sentence sounded believable, because it contained tiny pieces of truth wrapped inside enormous lies. Yes, I occasionally talked to Robert while standing beside his photograph. Many widows did. That wasn't dementia, that was grief. Then Derek testified. He called the obituary an unfortunate misunderstanding. According to him, it had been a private draft accidentally published online while the family prepared for the inevitable. I almost laughed. Instead, I watched him perform. Finally, Claire's attorney played several short video clips. In one, I stood in my kitchen asking, "Where did I put those keys?" In another, I asked Claire twice whether Emma's recital started at 6. The courtroom grew quiet. Even I looked forgetful. Until Daniel stood. Your Honor. He walked to the screen. Would you please note the timestamps? The clips had been recorded weeks apart. Presented together, they appeared to occur on the same afternoon. My daughter had been filming me for months, not to preserve memories, to manufacture evidence. Then Claire's attorney presented the physician's letter. Daniel accepted a copy. He read it silently. Then he looked up. Something in his expression changed. Not fear, curiosity. Very slowly he folded the letter and placed it back on the table. Your Honor, he said, I believe this document raises far more questions than it answers. The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. Daniel remained standing with the physician's letter in his hand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse anyone of fraud. Instead, he looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, before this document is admitted into evidence, I respectfully request permission to ask a few questions regarding its origin. Claire's attorney rose immediately. Objection. The letter speaks for itself. Daniel didn't even turn toward him. Does it? The judge adjusted her glasses. I'll allow limited questioning. Daniel nodded once. Thank you. He looked back at the document. This letter states that Dr. Stephen Harlan personally evaluated Mrs. Frances Bennett on June 14th. He paused. Is that correct? Claire's attorney glanced at the page. Yes. Daniel smiled politely. I thought so. He reached into his briefcase and removed another folder. I contacted Dr. Harlan's office yesterday afternoon. Claire's attorney stiffened. Daniel continued. Because my client insisted she had never met this physician. A flicker crossed Claire's face. It was gone almost instantly. The office manager searched every patient record from the past 5 years. He laid a certified statement before the judge. There is no record that Dr. Harlan has ever examined Frances Bennett. The judge leaned forward. Claire's attorney quickly interrupted. Perhaps the visit occurred at another facility. Daniel shook his head. I considered that possibility. He produced another document. Dr. Harlan also signed this sworn affidavit this morning. He read aloud. I have never evaluated, treated, consulted regarding or signed any medical opinion concerning Frances Bennett. Silence. The judge lowered her eyes to the affidavit. Claire's attorney hurriedly flipped through his files. Daniel wasn't finished. He further states that the signature appearing on the submitted letter is not his. The courtroom erupted into whispers. The judge struck her gavel. Order! I looked toward Claire. She had gone completely pale. Derek leaned toward her and whispered something urgently. She refused to look at him. The judge examined the affidavit for nearly a minute before speaking. Counsel, Claire's attorney cleared his throat. I will need an opportunity to review this. I'm sure you will. Daniel's voice remained calm. But my client has been accused of suffering from severe cognitive decline, based in part on a medical opinion that now appears fraudulent. The judge removed the physician's letter from the evidence pile. This document will not be considered today. For the first time since entering the courtroom, I felt air return to my lungs. Daniel sat beside me. Quietly, he whispered, "One lie down. But many more remain." The hearing continued. The judge called me to the witness stand. As I stood, Claire watched me with an expression I couldn't understand. Fear, regret, or simply panic because her plan had begun to unravel. I placed my hand on the Bible and took the oath. Daniel approached first. "Mrs. Bennett, how long did you work for the Richmond Ledger?" 39 years. "What was your position when you retired?" "Features editor." "What were your responsibilities?" "I supervised reporters, managed investigations, edited long-form articles, and reviewed legal notices, including obituaries." Several people in the courtroom looked toward Claire. Daniel continued, "Do you manage your own finances?" "I did until I trusted my daughter to help after I injured my wrist." "Can you tell the court today's date?" I answered immediately. "The 5th of August, 2026. "The current president," I answered. "The approximate balance of your retirement account before the recent transfers." I answered, "Within a few $1,000s. "The property taxes on your Richmond home." I answered again. Daniel smiled slightly. "No further questions." Claire's attorney stood. His tone was noticeably softer than before. "Mrs. Bennett, yes. You occasionally forget small things, don't you? Like everyone else. You've misplaced your glasses. Yes. You've asked your daughter the same question more than once. Sometimes. You've become emotional speaking about your late husband. Every widow I know has." He paced slowly. "So you admit your memory isn't perfect?" I looked directly at him. "I've never claimed perfection. My question is simple." "Mine is too." He frowned. "Go ahead." "Have you ever misplaced your car keys?" The courtroom became quiet again. He blinked. "That's irrelevant." "No." I shook my head gently. "It's exactly relevant." I turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, if forgetting where you placed your keys proves dementia, then nearly everyone in this room qualifies." A few people smiled. Even the judge's lips twitched. Claire's attorney changed direction. "Mrs. Bennett, why would your own daughter seek guardianship unless she genuinely believed you needed help?" The question hurt more than I expected. I took a slow breath. "I don't know when my daughter stopped seeing me as her mother." The room remained silent. "But believing a lie doesn't make it true." He returned to his table. No further questions. The judge ordered a short recess. As people filed into the hallway, Daniel motioned for Ruth and me to follow him into a conference room. He closed the door. "We've weakened the medical claim." "What about the videos?" "We'll deal with those." He spread printed photographs across the table. I looked closely during the recess. I recognized every image Claire had submitted: the mailbox, the grocery store, the park. Daniel pointed toward the timestamps. "Notice anything?" I studied them carefully. Then I saw it. The dates. He nodded. "They span almost 8 months. But they were presented together." "Exactly." He circled one image. "This photograph supposedly shows you wandering." "It doesn't. It shows you standing outside your mailbox." "I was waiting for a package." "The package?" "My new reading lamp." Daniel wrote another note. "What about this one? The grocery store." "I had forgotten my shopping list." "You went back inside and bought everything." "Yes," he smiled. "Receipts." "What?" "If you used your credit card." Understanding flooded over me. The purchase history. It establishes exactly what happened. He moved to the park photograph. "You looked confused." "I was waiting for Ruth." Ruth immediately reached into her purse. "I still keep a paper calendar." She flipped through several pages. "I wrote everything down." After a moment she stopped. "There." She turned the book toward us. "Lunch with Frances at Bird Park." The date matched the photograph. Daniel grinned. "They've accidentally documented your social life." For the first time in days I laughed. Not because anything was amusing, because hope had returned. Then Daniel's assistant knocked. "Sorry to interrupt." "What is it?" Daniel asked. She handed him another note. "A courier delivered this 10 minutes ago." Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a certified copy of the neurologist's completed evaluation from the previous afternoon. He read quickly, then handed it to me. The conclusion appeared in bold letters. Patient demonstrates no clinical evidence of dementia, cognitive impairment, or diminished decision-making capacity. My eyes filled with tears, not because I doubted my own mind, because someone had forced me to prove I still possessed it. Daniel carefully placed the report inside his trial folder. This helps. Enough to win. It helps. He remained thoughtful. Something still bothers me. What? The forged physician's letter. You think Claire wrote it? I don't know. He tapped the signature. But whoever created this had access to authentic medical paperwork. How? I intend to find out. The court reconvened an hour later. Before testimony resumed, Daniel quietly leaned toward me. I've already contacted Dr. Harlan again. Why? I asked whether this fake signature resembles anything he has seen before. And Daniel looked toward Claire and Derek across the courtroom. He told me something interesting. What? The letterhead wasn't created from one of his patient files. It wasn't. No. Daniel's voice dropped lower. It appears to have been copied from an old medical record belonging to someone else. Who? He closed the folder. I don't know yet. But I have a very strong suspicion. For reasons I couldn't explain, Robert's face appeared in my mind. And suddenly I remembered something. A year before he died, Claire had insisted on organizing every one of his medical records. The hearing ended later that afternoon without a final ruling. The judge denied Claire's request for immediate emergency guardianship, citing the conflicting medical evidence and the questions surrounding the forged physician's letter. However, she stopped short of dismissing the petition altogether. Instead, she ordered a full evidentiary hearing within 2 weeks. Until then, my finances would remain temporarily frozen under the court's supervision, and neither Claire nor I could make major decisions involving my estate. It wasn't the complete victory I wanted, but it wasn't the defeat Claire had expected. Outside the courthouse, television cameras weren't waiting. Thankfully, this wasn't the kind of story that attracted reporters, at least not yet. It was simply another painful family dispute hidden behind courthouse walls. Daniel walked Ruth and me toward his car. We bought ourselves time. I don't want time, I said quietly. I want the truth. And we'll get it. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen before answering. Mercer. He listened silently. Then his expression changed. I understand. Another pause. Thank you. He ended the call. What happened? I asked. Dr. Harlan called. The physician. Daniel nodded. He finished comparing the forged letter. And it wasn't only copied from one of Robert's medical files. What do you mean? The formatting, page layout, and electronic template all match records from Richmond Memorial Hospital. Robert had spent his final weeks there. So whoever created the fake report had access to Robert's hospital paperwork. I closed my eyes. Claire. She had insisted on organizing every folder after Robert died. She had scanned every medical document for safekeeping. Daniel looked thoughtful. I've requested the hospital's audit logs. Audit logs. They record who accessed digital records. You think they'll find Claire? I don't know. But someone used those files. As we spoke, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hello. Silence. I heard breathing. Then a whisper. Grandma Emma. Sweetheart. I'm using Lily's phone. Are you all right? No. She sounded exhausted. I don't have much time. Where are you? At Lily's house. Your parents let you go. I told them we were studying. Her voice dropped even lower. I lied. I exchanged a quick glance with Daniel. Emma, are you safe? For now. What's wrong? I found something. My heartbeat quickened. What did you find? I copied Dad's computer. Daniel immediately pulled a small notebook from his pocket. What exactly did you copy? He mouthed silently. I repeated the question. Emma swallowed. Everything I could. What does that mean? Documents. What kind? I don't know. Pictures, emails, and recordings. Daniel looked up sharply. Recordings, I asked. Yes. Of what? I didn't listen. Why not? I was scared. The fear in her voice made my chest ache. She was 17 years old. She should have been worrying about college applications and driver's licenses. Instead, she was secretly copying evidence against her own parents. Where are the files now? I asked. On a flash drive. Do your parents know? I don't think so. Daniel quickly wrote another note. Meet immediately. Public location. I nodded. Emma. Yes. Can you meet me? She hesitated. I don't know. It has to be somewhere safe. She breathed shakily. The old Methodist church. The one Robert and I had attended for nearly 30 years. Tomorrow morning. What time? 9. I'll be there. No police. The request surprised me. Why? If Dad sees police. She stopped. He'll know I told. The line went quiet. Emma. I'm afraid he'll take me away. The call ended. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Daniel finally broke the silence. She's terrified. I know. But she has something. The next morning arrived gray and humid. The church parking lot was nearly empty. Ruth stayed inside the car while Daniel and I waited near the side entrance. At exactly 9 o'clock, a blue sedan pulled into the lot. A teenage girl climbed out carrying an ordinary canvas backpack. Emma looked thinner than she had only a week earlier. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. The moment she saw me, she ran across the parking lot. I hugged her tightly. For a second, she was 7 years old again. Then she stepped back and looked around nervously. We don't have much time. Daniel introduced himself gently. I'm here to help your grandmother. Emma nodded. I know who you are. She opened her backpack. Inside was a silver USB drive. I copied everything before Dad changed his password. Daniel accepted it carefully. Did anyone see you? I don't think so. He didn't insert the drive immediately. Instead, he asked softly, Emma, tell me what you know. She stared at the church doors. I didn't understand at first. When did you become suspicious? The obituary. She looked at me. Mom wrote it 3 days before she posted it. I felt my heart stop. How do you know? I saw it on the computer. Daniel quickly asked, only one version. Emma shook her head. There were lots. Lots. They kept changing it. My breathing became shallow. What changed? Different causes of death. What? Emma nodded. One draft said heart failure. Another said stroke. Then Dad told Mom dementia sounded better. Better, I whispered. He said people wouldn't ask questions if everyone thought you'd been sick for a long time. The parking lot suddenly felt cold despite the August heat. Emma continued. They argued about the picture. What picture? My birthday photo. The one they used. Mom said you looked too healthy. My knees nearly gave way. She had criticized the photograph because I looked alive. Daniel remained remarkably calm. What else? Emma took another deep breath. The donation page. What about it? Dad made it. And your mother? She shared it. Willingly. Emma looked directly at me. There was no uncertainty in her face. Yes. The single word hurt more than every lie Claire had told. I had spent days wondering whether Derek had manipulated her, whether she had been frightened, whether she had convinced herself she was protecting me. Emma's answer destroyed those comforting possibilities. Daniel asked the question neither Ruth nor I could speak. Did your mother ever object? Emma slowly shook her head. No. What did she say? Emma closed her eyes as if replaying the memory. I'll post it. My breathing stopped. People will believe me because I'm her daughter. The sentence echoed across the empty parking lot. No one spoke. Emma continued almost mechanically. Dad wanted to wait another day. Why? He thought it looked suspicious. And your mother? She said waiting would give you time to come home. Daniel wrote furiously. Anything else? Emma nodded again. They practiced. Practiced what? Crying. I stared at her. What? They stood in the living room. Dad timed Mom. Timed her. He said she needed to sound more exhausted. Emma's voice finally broke. I watched them. Tears rolled down her face. They kept doing it over and over. I pulled her into my arms. She cried against my shoulder. I wanted to tell you. I know. I didn't know how. You did the right thing. Eventually, she stepped back. Daniel held up the flash drive. I'm going to examine this immediately. There's one folder you need to open first, Emma said. What folder? Estate transition. Daniel frowned. What is it? I don't know. But Dad told Mom if anyone ever found that folder. She stopped. They'd both go to prison. The words lingered between us. Daniel slipped the flash drive into his jacket pocket. I'll make a forensic copy before opening anything. Emma looked relieved. Then she remembered something. Wait. She reached back into her backpack. I almost forgot. She handed me a folded sheet of paper. What is this? I printed it yesterday. I unfolded it slowly. At the top appeared the title, Family Communication Plan, following Frances Bennett's death. Below were bullet points. Who should be called first? What story should be repeated? How to answer questions from neighbors? Which charities should receive memorial donations? Even instructions for responding if someone claimed to have seen me alive. Suggested response. Grief often causes confusion. Please respect our family's privacy. I couldn't breathe. They had planned for the possibility that someone would report seeing me. They already had an answer prepared. My own existence had been written off as a symptom of other people's grief. Daniel carefully took the paper from my trembling hands. Then he looked at Emma. You may have just saved your grandmother's life. Emma lowered her eyes. I just wanted someone to know she was still alive. Daniel refused to examine the flash drive on his office computer. We're treating this as evidence, he said as we returned to his law office. If someone challenges its authenticity later, I want a complete chain of custody. He called a digital forensics specialist. He trusted a quiet woman named Melissa Grant, who arrived less than an hour later, carrying 2 encrypted laptops and a small black equipment case. She smiled politely. I'm going to make an exact forensic image of the drive before we open anything. I watched her connect the USB device through a specialized adapter. She never touched the original files directly. Every movement seemed deliberate. When she finished, she looked at Daniel. The copy is verified. Good. She opened the mirrored drive. The first folder listed exactly what Emma had described. Estate transition. Melissa clicked it open. The room fell silent. Inside were dozens of subfolders: property, banking, medical, memorial, insurance, real estate. Emma hadn't exaggerated. Someone had built an entire project around my disappearance. Daniel slowly removed his glasses. My God. Melissa opened the folder labeled Memorial. Multiple drafts of my obituary appeared. The earliest version listed heart failure. Another claimed complications from a stroke. The final version, the one Claire had published, described advanced dementia. Each file contained editing histories, different authors, different timestamps. Claire's name appeared repeatedly, so did Derek's. Melissa opened the revision history. They were editing this together. No one spoke. I felt strangely calm. Somewhere inside me, grief had begun turning into clarity. The next folder contained spreadsheets. One column listed every person likely to donate. Another estimated the amount each family might contribute. Church members, former co-workers, neighbors, friends from Robert's Veterans Association. Beside several names were handwritten notes. Very generous. Call personally. Mention private nursing expenses. I stared at the screen. They had budgeted my death. Melissa quietly moved to another folder. Property liquidation. My home appeared on the first page. Estimated market value, expected sale price, projected closing costs, even suggested dates for listing. Below that came page after page of household inventory. dining table, antique china, Robert's workshop tools, my jewelry, his military medals, family heirlooms. Every item carried an estimated resale value. Nothing was sentimental. Everything had become inventory. Daniel shook his head slowly. This wasn't impulsive. No, it was organized. Melissa continued opening folders. Then she stopped. This one is password protected. What is it called? Daniel asked. She enlarged the folder name. Emma Trust. I looked at Daniel. Neither of us spoke. He leaned closer. Can you open it? Melissa nodded. It may take a few minutes. While her software worked, Daniel reviewed additional financial files. Several invoices immediately caught his attention. Construction suppliers, equipment leases, payroll shortages, bank demand letters. Every document belonged to Derek's company. The dates matched the transfers from my accounts almost exactly. He was drowning, Daniel murmured, before any of this happened. Melissa looked up. The money wasn't financing a lifestyle. It wasn't, no, she pointed at the invoices. He was trying to keep the business alive. That didn't excuse what he had done, but it explained why he had done it. Desperation had found opportunity. Then the password cracked. The Emma Trust folder opened. My heart stopped. Robert had established a college trust for Emma when she was 6 years old. He deposited money into it every Christmas and every birthday. By the time he died, it contained nearly $300,000. I assumed it had remained untouched. I was wrong. Melissa opened the first spreadsheet. Withdrawal history, transfer confirmations, investment liquidation forms. Daniel leaned so close his tie nearly touched the keyboard. No. Every major investment had been sold. Almost the entire trust had been emptied, transferred into Bennett Family Care LLC, the same company receiving money from my retirement accounts. I covered my mouth. They stole Emma's future. Daniel nodded slowly. They stole from 3 generations at once. Robert had spent years building that fund. He wanted Emma to graduate from college without debt. He wanted choices she might otherwise never have. Now that money had disappeared into Derek's collapsing construction company, Melissa kept scrolling. There are authorization forms. Daniel examined them. His expression hardened. Impossible. What? He turned the monitor toward me. Each withdrawal required 2 trustee signatures, mine and Daniel's. I recognized my own signature immediately. Or rather, I recognized an imitation of it. The shape looked similar, but subtle details were wrong. The pressure, the spacing, the final flourish beneath my last name. Someone had practiced. Daniel pointed lower. My signature. I looked. It appeared genuine. Except, I've watched you sign papers for years. He nodded. This isn't mine. Melissa enlarged the image. Several pen strokes hesitated unnaturally. They traced it. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Robert. I looked at him. What about Robert? He insisted on dual authorization. For exactly this reason. I believe so. Daniel stared at the forged documents. He never said Derek would commit fraud. But he wanted safeguards. I remembered one evening shortly before Robert entered hospice. He had asked whether Emma still talked about becoming an architect. At the time, the question seemed ordinary. Now I wondered whether he had been thinking about the trust, planning for a future he wouldn't see, trying to protect his granddaughter after he was gone. Even then, he had been protecting us. Melissa opened another folder. Email correspondence. Several messages passed between Derek and Claire. Most discussed deadlines, loans, upcoming payments. Then one email caught Daniel's attention. Subject needs second signature. ASAP, Derek wrote, if Mercer signs before Friday, we're fine. If he refuses, we'll have to handle it another way. Claire replied 20 minutes later. He'll never sign. We'll make it work. I closed my eyes. There it was. No misunderstanding. No accident. No manipulation by Derek alone. Claire knew. She had known from the beginning. The room remained silent until Melissa spoke again. There's another file. She opened an audio recording. Daniel hesitated. Should we? I already knew the answer. Yes. The speakers filled with muffled voices. At first only footsteps. Cabinet doors, papers moving. Then Derek spoke. We're running out of time, Claire answered immediately. I know. The trust money buys us maybe 4 months. I said I know. 4 months. That was all Robert's years of careful saving meant to them. 4 months. Derek continued. Once the house sells, Claire interrupted. It will sell. If your mother comes back, she won't. How can you be sure? There was a pause. Then Claire laughed quietly. I've sent her away. Another pause. By the time she realizes what's happening, everyone will believe she's confused. No one in the room moved. Even Melissa stopped typing. Claire continued. The obituary fixes everything. Derek asked, You really think people will believe it? They'll believe me. Her answer came without hesitation. I'm her daughter. The recording ended. I stared at the blank computer screen. Daniel removed his glasses again. That recording alone changes everything. I barely heard him. All I could think about was Claire's voice. Confident, certain, not frightened, not manipulated. She hadn't sounded like a woman trapped in an abusive marriage. She had sounded like an equal partner, perhaps even the architect. My phone vibrated. It was Emma. I answered immediately. Grandma? Yes. Did it help? I struggled to steady my voice. It helped. She exhaled with relief. I was scared the files weren't enough. They're more than enough. There was a brief silence. Then she asked the question I had dreaded. Are Mom and Dad going to jail? I looked toward Daniel. He wasn't listening. He was already organizing evidence into separate folders. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But none of this is your fault. Emma didn't respond. Instead, she whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. I wish Grandpa were here. So did I. Because Robert would have known exactly what to say. He would have reminded Emma that honesty sometimes costs more than silence. But it is still worth paying. After we ended the call, Daniel finally looked up. We're requesting emergency protective orders first thing tomorrow. For the trust. For everything. My accounts. Your house. He paused. And Emma. I frowned. What do you mean? Daniel folded the recording transcript. If Derek realizes Emma copied these files, he looked directly at me. She may be the next person he tries to control. That night I didn't expect Claire to call, yet at 9:17 p.m. my phone lit up with her name. For a long moment I simply stared at it. After everything I had learned, the forged documents, the emptied accounts, the obituary drafts, the recording in which she calmly volunteered to publish news of my death. I couldn't imagine what she had left to say. Ruth looked at the screen. Are you going to answer? I don't know. Daniel, who was still reviewing documents across the conference table, looked up. If you do put it on speaker. I nodded and answered. There was silence. Then I heard breathing. Finally, Claire spoke. Mom! Her voice sounded tired, not theatrical, just exhausted. What do you want, Claire? I need to see you. You've already seen me. No, she hesitated. I need to talk without Derek. Daniel immediately wrote 2 words on his legal pad. Don't refuse. I understood. If Claire wanted to speak voluntarily, we needed to hear her. Where? I asked. Anywhere he won't find us. You expect me to trust you? No. She answered so quickly that I almost believed her. I don't expect that anymore. Daniel scribbled again. Public place. Daytime. I repeated the condition. Tomorrow, 11 o'clock, the Riverside Botanical Gardens Caf. I'll be there. And Claire? Yes. If Derek comes, he won't. The call ended. None of us spoke for several seconds. Daniel finally broke the silence. She's scared. Or she's acting. Possibly. He closed another folder. But people under pressure often tell the truth when their plans begin falling apart. The next morning, Daniel insisted on accompanying me, although he agreed to remain out of sight unless necessary. Ruth stayed nearby as well. At exactly 11 o'clock, Claire walked into the cafe alone. She looked nothing like the confident woman whose voice I had heard on Emma's recording. Her makeup barely covered the dark circles beneath her eyes. Her hands shook as she carried a paper coffee cup. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly sat across from me. "I'm sorry." The words hung between us. I waited. She continued, "I know that isn't enough." "No, it isn't." She lowered her eyes. "I deserve that." I folded my hands on the table. "So why are you here?" She looked out the window before answering. "I can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Lying." I studied her face carefully. For years I had been able to tell when Claire hid something. She would touch the necklace Robert had given her for her 16th birthday. Now she was twisting it around her fingers, exactly as she had when she was a frightened teenager. "Derek started all of this." I said nothing. "He told me the business was collapsing." "Was it?" "Yes." "Then what?" "He said we would lose everything." She took a slow breath. "He said if the company failed, we'd lose the house, Emma's future. Everything." I looked at her quietly. "So you decided to steal mine?" Tears gathered in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen? We only needed a loan." "You took nearly $200,000. I know." "You emptied Emma's trust." I know. "You told the world I was dead." Claire covered her face. "I know." The cafe had become almost completely silent around us. No one recognized us. To everyone else, we were simply two women having a painful conversation. "I listened to the recording," I said. Her hands froze. "I know about the obituary drafts." She didn't answer. "I know about the donation spreadsheet." Still nothing. "I know about Emma's trust." Finally, she whispered, "She gave you the files." I didn't confirm it. I didn't need to. Claire already knew. "I never wanted Emma involved." I leaned forward. "You involved her the moment you stole the money her grandfather left for her." She began crying. Real tears. Not the practiced sobs Emma had described. "I thought we could put everything back." "When?" "After Derek got the company stable." I stared at her. "So your plan was to fake my death, sell my house, drain my retirement, steal your daughter's education fund." My voice remained calm. "And then repay everything before anyone noticed." She couldn't answer. Because there was no answer. After a long silence, I asked the question that had haunted me since Emma handed us the recording. "Who decided to publish the obituary?" Claire slowly lifted her head. "I did." No excuses. No hesitation. Just the truth. "Why?" She closed her eyes. "Because Derek thought people might start asking questions if you disappeared." "So you announced my death?" "He wanted to wait." "I know." She looked surprised. I heard the recording. Whatever strength she still possessed disappeared from her face. "So you know." "I know you said people would believe you." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I was wrong." "No." I shook my head gently. "You were right. They believed you." That sentence hurt both of us. For a long time, Claire simply cried. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something I never expected. "I've been jealous of you for years." The confession caught me completely off guard. "Jealous? You were always—" "Frances Bennett." I frowned. "The editor everyone respected. The woman Dad loved. The person everyone called when they needed advice." She laughed bitterly. "I spent my whole life being Frances Bennett's daughter." I listened without interrupting. "When Dad died," she swallowed hard, "everyone looked at you. They asked how you were doing. They brought meals for you. They told me to take care of you." She wiped her eyes. I started thinking. She couldn't finish. "What?" "That maybe it was finally my turn. My turn to matter." The words broke something inside me. Not because they justified what she had done. Nothing could. But because I suddenly understood how resentment had been growing beneath the surface for years while I never noticed. "You thought my life belonged to you." She nodded weakly. "I thought—" She stared into her untouched coffee. I thought I deserved it before you were gone. Silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question only a mother could ask. Claire. She looked up. When you posted that obituary, did you think about me at all? She burst into tears. I tried not to. That answer hurt more than every other confession combined. Not because she hated me, but because she had deliberately taught herself not to think of me as a living human being, only as an obstacle. After several minutes, she reached into her purse. I brought something. She removed an old smartphone. I used this instead of my regular phone. I looked at it without touching it. What's on it? Our messages. Derek's messages. Pictures. Voice recordings. She placed it on the table. And this. Next came a small spiral notebook. Every page contained handwritten dates, transfers, account numbers, loan payments, amounts. Beside many entries appeared Derek's initials. Others carried hers. I wrote everything down. Why? I thought. She laughed bitterly. Maybe someday I'd need to remember exactly where everything went. Daniel had quietly entered the cafe without either of us noticing. He stopped several feet away, waiting for my signal. I looked back at Claire. Why are you giving me this now? She answered without looking up. Because Derek doesn't know I copied it. And when he finds out, he'll leave. I studied her carefully. Are you asking me to save your marriage? She shook her head. No, I'm asking you to save Emma. For the first time since she sat down, I believed every word she said. I slid the notebook toward myself, but left the phone where it was. There is only one way forward. Claire nodded slowly. I know. You tell the truth. Everything. In court. To the investigators. To the bank. To Emma. She closed her eyes. I will. I leaned back in my chair. Fear may explain why you made one terrible decision. She looked at me. But it doesn't excuse months of lies. I know. And jealousy doesn't erase responsibility. Another tear rolled down her face. I know. For the first time since this nightmare began, Claire wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking me to understand. She wasn't even asking me to protect her. She was simply admitting that every terrible choice still belonged to her. Daniel finally stepped forward and quietly picked up the phone. As he examined it, he looked at me and gave the slightest nod. Whatever Claire had just handed us, it was enough to change everything. I barely slept after meeting Claire. Her notebook sat on Daniel's conference table beside the phone she had surrendered, both sealed inside evidence bags. Every page had been photographed, every file copied. The more Daniel's forensic team examined them, the clearer the timeline became. Claire had not exaggerated. She had documented nearly every transfer Derek ordered her to make. Dates, amounts, account numbers, loan balances, names of creditors, even short handwritten notes, paid equipment lease, covered payroll, move money before statement arrives. She had written them all down. Not because she planned to confess, because some part of her had never fully trusted Derek. By sunrise, Daniel had already filed emergency motions to protect my remaining assets and to prevent Derek from accessing Emma until the court could review the evidence. At 9 that morning, Daniel's phone rang. He listened for less than a minute before ending the call. He knows. I looked up. Derek? He nodded. Claire didn't go home last night. Where is she? At a hotel. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that she was away from Derek. Sadness because my daughter had become afraid to sleep inside her own home. What did he do? He reported her missing. I frowned. Missing. He told police she left in an emotionally unstable condition. The irony almost made me laugh. For weeks they had tried convincing everyone that I was mentally unstable. Now Derek was attempting the same tactic with Claire. Daniel picked up another folder. It gets worse. What now? He contacted 2 banks before 8 this morning. My stomach tightened. Trying to move money. Trying to access additional credit. Can he? Not anymore. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. The court orders reached every institution before business opened. For the first time since this nightmare began, Derek had reached a locked door instead of an open one. But men like Derek rarely accepted defeat quietly. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Emma. I answered immediately. Grandma? She sounded out of breath. What's wrong? Dad came home. My pulse quickened. When? About 20 minutes ago. Is he there now? No. What happened? He was furious. I could hear her trying to steady her breathing. He kept asking where Mom was. What did you tell him? I said I didn't know. Then what? He started opening drawers, looking for something. Daniel immediately began taking notes. What was he searching for? I asked. I don't know. He went through the office, then the garage. He even emptied Grandpa's workbench. I exchanged a glance with Daniel. The garage, Emma continued. Then he said, her voice dropped. Where is the box? Daniel stopped writing. What box? He mouthed silently. I repeated the question. I don't know. But he kept saying someone must have moved it. What did it look like? I've never seen it. He only called it the metal box. Daniel leaned back slowly. I think I know. What? I whispered. When Robert updated his estate plan 6 years ago, he mentioned keeping original trust documents in a locked steel document case. My heartbeat accelerated. I've never seen it. He probably kept it hidden, Emma interrupted. Grandma? I'm here. After he couldn't find it, she swallowed. He said if anyone got into that box, everything was over. Silence filled Daniel's office. The metal box. Whatever was inside it frightened Derek more than frozen bank accounts or court hearings. Then Emma said something else. He left with a crowbar. Daniel and I looked at each other. A crowbar. He put it in the truck. Where did he go? I don't know. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Emma whispered, I think he's coming back. What makes you say that? He told someone on the phone. She hesitated. Tonight. After the call ended, Daniel stood immediately. We're notifying the police. You think he'll return to my house? I think he'll try to recover whatever Robert hid. By late afternoon, Daniel had arranged something I hadn't expected. Extra patrols. Not around me, around my house. He also contacted Luis, my longtime neighbor. Luis agreed to keep watch from his porch if anything unusual happened. I don't want you anywhere near the property tonight, Daniel told me. I understand. Promise me. I promise. It was almost midnight when Ruth's security camera alert chimed. Not my house, Ruth's driveway. A dark pickup truck rolled slowly past without stopping. Daniel checked the notification. License plate. Ruth enlarged the image. The numbers were unreadable. 10 minutes later, Luis called. Someone's at your house. Daniel put him on speaker. What do you see? A pickup. One person. In the backyard. No lights. My heart pounded. Daniel immediately called 911. Luis continued whispering. He's carrying something. What? A pause. A crowbar. Exactly as Emma had predicted. We listened as Luis quietly described everything. He went into the detached workshop. Another pause. I hear metal. Then silence. Almost 2 full minutes passed. Suddenly Luis whispered again. He's dragging something. What? A gray steel box. Daniel closed his eyes. The document case. Luis kept watching. He can't open it. A loud metallic bang echoed faintly through the phone. He's hitting it. Another crash. Then another. The sound made my stomach twist. Robert had built that workshop with his own hands. Now Derek was destroying it, searching for evidence. Sirens. Faint at first. Growing louder. Luis whispered urgently. He hears them. What is he doing? He left the box. No. Wait. He's coming back. The line shook as Luis adjusted his position. He picked it up again. Another pause. No. He dropped it. Car doors slammed. Voices shouted. Police! Hands where we can see them. Luis stopped speaking. We waited. Finally, he came back on the line. They've got him. I closed my eyes. Not in relief, not yet. Daniel remained focused. Did they recover the box? Luis looked again. Yes. The officers have it. An hour later, Daniel received confirmation. The steel document case had been taken into police custody before Derek could force it open. The next morning, with proper authorization, Daniel and I accompanied detectives as the box was unlocked. Inside were neatly organized folders. Robert's handwriting appeared on every label. Trust originals, property deeds, insurance. Then one folder none of us expected. Signature. I frowned. What is this? Daniel carefully opened it. Inside were dozens of practice sheets. Not Robert's, not mine, someone else's. My signature, Daniel's signature, even Robert's signature, copied repeatedly, over and over. Some attempts looked clumsy, others frighteningly accurate. Detective Howard looked up. Practice sheets. Daniel nodded grimly. Forgeries. The detective continued searching the box. Another envelope. Inside were counterfeit notary seals, blank acknowledgement forms, expired commission stamps, everything needed to manufacture convincing legal documents. The room became completely silent. Then Detective Howard removed one final notebook. He opened the first page. Every forged signature corresponded to a specific document. Trust withdrawals, property applications, loan paperwork, home equity forms. It wasn't simply evidence of fraud. It was an instruction manual. Daniel slowly closed the notebook. This ties everything together. The detective nodded. It also explains why he came back. He wasn't trying to steal money anymore. I looked at the battered steel case. He was trying to destroy the truth. Just then, Daniel's phone vibrated. It was Melissa. She spoke quickly. Daniel listened, thanked her, and ended the call. What happened? I asked. They finished recovering deleted files from Claire's phone. And there are text messages between Derek and Claire from last night. What do they say? Daniel looked directly at me. They prove Derek discovered someone inside the family copied the evidence. I felt my chest tighten. Emma, he nodded. He doesn't know it was Emma. But now, Daniel folded the phone slowly. He's going to start figuring it out. The courtroom looked different the second time I entered it. Nothing about the furniture had changed. The judge still occupied the same bench. The flags still stood motionless in their corners. The rows of polished wooden pews still creaked whenever someone shifted their weight. What had changed was the balance of truth. 2 weeks earlier, Claire and Derek had walked into that room carrying a carefully rehearsed story. Today, Daniel carried evidence, boxes of it, bank records, forensic reports, audio recordings, the original steel document case recovered from Robert's workshop, the forged signature samples, the deleted files from Claire's phone. Most importantly, the independent medical evaluations confirming that I was fully competent to manage my own affairs. When the judge entered, every person in the room stood. I glanced toward Claire. She looked exhausted. Unlike the first hearing, she wasn't sitting beside Derek. She sat several seats away with her own attorney. Derek remained at the opposite table, his expression hard and unreadable. He never looked in Claire's direction. Daniel leaned toward me. Remember, he whispered, today isn't about revenge. I know. It's about facts. The hearing began with the medical evidence. Daniel called the neurologist who had evaluated me. He explained every cognitive assessment he had performed: memory, attention, executive functioning, language, reasoning. Each score fell well within the normal range for someone my age. The judge reviewed the written report carefully. Claire's attorney did not challenge it. Next came the psychologist. She testified that I demonstrated excellent judgment, intact decision-making ability, and no clinical signs of dementia. Again, there was no meaningful cross-examination. The forged physician's letter had collapsed completely. Then Daniel addressed the guardianship petition itself. Your Honor, he said, the foundation of this request was the claim that Mrs. Bennett lacked the capacity to make decisions. He paused. The evidence now proves the opposite. The judge nodded thoughtfully. After a brief review of the medical reports, she spoke clearly. The emergency guardianship petition is denied. A weight I had carried for weeks finally lifted. But Daniel wasn't finished. Your Honor, there are additional matters before the court. He requested permission to present evidence concerning the financial transactions that had occurred under the power of attorney. The judge agreed. Melissa Grant testified first. Using enlarged screens, she explained the forensic recovery of the deleted computer files. Every step had been documented, every file verified. Nothing had been altered. The obituary drafts appeared on the courtroom monitor, then the donation spreadsheets, then the family communication plan. I watched several people in the gallery exchange shocked looks. The room grew even quieter when Melissa played the recovered audio recording. Claire's voice filled the courtroom. I'll share it. They'll believe me because I'm her daughter. No one interrupted. No one looked away. When the recording ended, the silence felt heavier than any argument. Daniel then introduced the financial evidence. The bank investigator testified that nearly all major transfers originated after the obituary had been published. The records showed funds leaving my retirement accounts, funds leaving my home equity line, funds leaving Emma's education trust. Each transaction flowed into Bennett Family Care, LLC. Each transfer benefited Derek's struggling construction company. The forged trustee signatures were displayed next. The detective who recovered Robert's Steele document case explained where the signature practice sheets had been found. He described the counterfeit notary seals, the blank acknowledgement forms, the notebook connecting forged signatures to specific financial documents. The evidence fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Then came the moment I never expected. Claire stood. Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, but she quietly shook her head. I need to testify. The judge allowed it. Claire walked to the witness stand without looking at Derek. She took the oath. For several moments, she simply stared at her hands. Then she began speaking. My mother is alive. Her voice trembled. She has always been mentally competent. I knew that. No one moved. I helped create the obituary. I shared it. I signed documents I knew were false. I authorized transfers that should never have happened. Every sentence seemed to cost her something. She did not cry immediately. Instead, she answered every question directly. Yes, she had participated. Yes, she knew the obituary was false. Yes, she signed financial documents. Yes, she helped convince people that I suffered from dementia. When Daniel asked why she lowered her head, I convinced myself we would fix everything before anyone got hurt. Her voice cracked. I was wrong. Claire did not attempt to excuse herself. She admitted that jealousy, fear, and financial pressure had clouded her judgment. She accepted responsibility for every document bearing her signature. When Derek's attorney cross-examined her, he suggested she was lying only to protect herself. Claire surprised everyone. No. She looked directly toward me. I'm telling the truth because I've already destroyed enough. For the first time since Robert's death, I saw my daughter choose honesty, even though it hurt her. The judge listened carefully before turning to Derek. He declined to testify. Instead, his attorney argued that Claire had acted independently. But the emails, recordings, financial records, and recovered documents told a different story. The evidence showed planning, coordination, shared decisions. Neither could shift responsibility entirely onto the other. Late that afternoon, the judge delivered her rulings. The emergency guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice. Every temporary restriction placed upon my personal decision-making authority was immediately lifted. The court ordered that all transactions completed under the challenged power of attorney remain frozen pending the civil and criminal investigations. The pending sale of my home was suspended. The home equity line was frozen. The court further directed that Emma's trust assets be traced and preserved to the greatest extent possible. Finally, the judge addressed Claire directly. Your cooperation today will be considered by the appropriate authorities. She then turned toward Derek. The evidence presented raises serious questions regarding fraud, forgery, financial exploitation, and related offenses. These matters are referred for further criminal proceedings. The gavel struck. Just like that, the hearing ended. People slowly stood. Some quietly left. Others remained seated, absorbing what they had witnessed. I stayed where I was, not because I couldn't move, because I needed a moment to understand what had happened. The court had restored my legal voice. No judge had declared me incapable. No institution would force me into memory care. No one could continue pretending I was dead while I sat breathing in the same room. As I gathered my papers, Claire approached cautiously. She stopped several feet away. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." I nodded. "I know. I'll cooperate. I know. I'll repay everything I legally can." I believed she meant it. Whether she succeeded was another matter. Then she quietly walked away. I watched my daughter leave the courtroom alone. Winning had never felt so heavy. Justice had finally arrived. But justice could not erase the image of the little girl who once reached for my hand every time we crossed a street. Nor could it erase the woman who had once written my obituary before I had taken my final breath. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. Daniel stood beside me. "You have your life back." I looked toward the bright Virginia sky. "No," I answered softly. "I have my name back." The first morning I woke up in my own house again, I didn't make coffee. Instead, I stood barefoot in Robert's workshop. The smell of sawdust still lingered in the old wooden walls, despite everything that had happened. His workbench had been cleaned after the police finished collecting evidence, but the empty spaces where the steel document case had rested remained visible. I ran my fingers across the scarred oak surface. "This old place saved us," I whispered. Not because the workshop had been magical, not because Robert had somehow predicted every detail of what would happen after his death. It had saved us because my husband believed something I had never wanted to believe. Love alone could not protect a family. Sometimes the law had to help. Daniel arrived just after 9 carrying 2 leather briefcases. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You never interrupt," he smiled. "I brought paperwork." "Of course you did." "For once," he said, "it's good paperwork." We sat around my dining room table, the same table where Robert and I had celebrated birthdays, where Emma had colored Thanksgiving placemats, where Claire had once done her homework while I corrected newspaper proofs. Today the table held trust agreements instead of dinner plates. Daniel spread several folders before me. "We're starting over." "I thought we already had estate documents." "We do." He looked around the room. "But those documents assumed everyone would always act in good faith." Neither of us needed to explain why that assumption no longer existed. Daniel opened the first folder. "The house." He slid the deed toward me. "I recommend transferring ownership into a protective trust, so no individual can sell it." "Exactly." "What about me?" "You remain the lifetime beneficiary." "I still live here. I still make decisions." "You still own every practical right." He smiled gently. "But after everything you've survived, no one else should ever be able to manipulate paperwork the way they tried before." I signed slowly. Not because I hesitated, because every signature reminded me of the day I had unknowingly signed away my financial independence. Daniel noticed. "You read every page now." "I always will." He nodded. "So will I." The next folder concerned my retirement accounts. Instead of naming a single financial agent, Daniel proposed 3 independent safeguards: 2 signatures for major withdrawals, automatic notifications to multiple trusted contacts, quarterly independent reviews. "They seem excessive," I admitted. "They're supposed to." He smiled. "Good systems assume good people sometimes make bad decisions." I thought about Claire. Then I signed again. Finally, he opened the folder that mattered most: Emma's trust. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Robert had spent years building it. Although much of the money had been stolen, investigators had already frozen substantial assets belonging to Derek's company. Insurance policies and recovered funds meant that most of Emma's college trust would eventually be restored. Not all, but far more than we had feared. "I've rewritten everything," Daniel explained. "This trust can never again be accessed by a parent acting alone. What if something happens to me? You and I remain co-trustees. And after me, Emma receives full control only after reaching the required age." I smiled sadly. "Robert would like that." Daniel quietly nodded. He would. By lunchtime, the legal work was finished. As Daniel packed his briefcases, he hesitated. There's something else. What? I've been speaking with several organizations. What organizations? Groups that help older adults who become victims of financial exploitation. I listened carefully. They're interested in your experience. You mean interviews? Eventually, he smiled. But first, he handed me a brochure. They're creating a new educational program. I read the title, Protecting Independence After Retirement. The words stayed with me long after Daniel left. That afternoon, Emma came over carrying 2 grocery bags. I bought ingredients. For what? You haven't cooked since you came home. She wasn't wrong. For weeks, my life had revolved around lawyers, investigators, court hearings, and evidence. I had forgotten ordinary things, like making chicken soup, like setting the table for someone I loved, like laughing without checking whether someone was secretly recording me. Together, we chopped vegetables while soft music played through the kitchen. For the first time in months, the house sounded alive again. Halfway through preparing dinner, Emma became unusually quiet. Grandma, yes. Can I ask something? Always. She set down the knife. Do you hate Mom? The question deserved honesty. No. She looked surprised. I don't. I've been angry. I've been heartbroken. I've been disappointed. But hate, I slowly shook my head, would make me carry her choices forever. Emma stared into the simmering soup. I still love her. You should. She looked up quickly. Really, she's your mother. I don't want you to think I'm choosing her over you. I walked around the counter and hugged her. You don't have to choose. She began crying. I don't know how to love someone who hurt us. I held her a little tighter. You love carefully. What does that mean? It means you stop confusing love with permission. She thought quietly about that. Then she whispered, Can people really change? I looked toward Robert's empty chair. I hope so. Because, because if people couldn't change, I smiled sadly, there would be no reason to forgive anyone. A week later, investigators informed us that additional funds had been recovered through frozen business accounts and equipment sales. The amount wasn't enough to erase every loss, but it was enough to rebuild Emma's college fund almost completely. When Daniel called with the news, Emma hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. We did it. No, I smiled. Your grandfather did, she frowned. What do you mean? He built something stronger than money. What? A plan. He believed protection was another form of love. That evening, I visited Robert's grave for the first time since everything had ended. Fresh flowers rested beside the headstone. Someone else had been there. I smiled when I noticed the small handwritten note tucked beneath the vase. There was no signature, only one sentence. I'm trying to become someone Dad would still recognize. I knew immediately who had written it. Claire. She hadn't asked to meet me. She hadn't asked for forgiveness. She hadn't even waited to see whether I found the note. She had simply left it there. I folded the paper and slipped it into my purse. Not because everything was healed. Far from it. Healing wasn't a destination. It was a direction. Before leaving the cemetery, I looked at Robert's name carved into the granite. You were right, I whispered. I should have paid more attention. The wind moved gently through the trees. No answer came. None was needed. For the first time since discovering my own obituary, I no longer felt as though someone else was writing the ending of my life. I had reclaimed my home, my name, my voice. Now I intended to protect all three, not only for myself but for Emma, and for anyone else who might one day mistake trust for safety. Because I had learned that boundaries were not walls built against love. They were doors with locks ensuring that only those who honored love could be welcomed inside. 6 months passed before I agreed to meet Claire alone. Not because Daniel advised against it. Not because Ruth thought it was too soon. Because I needed enough time to know the difference between forgiveness and forgetting. The seasons changed quietly. The oak tree in my front yard, the one Robert had refused to cut down, traded its deep green leaves for shades of amber and gold. Emma began her senior year of high school. The criminal investigation against Derek continued moving through the courts. Civil proceedings over the stolen assets stretched from one hearing to another. Life, despite everything, insisted on continuing. Claire never called unexpectedly. She never appeared at my front door. She never asked Emma to persuade me to speak with her. Instead, once a month, Daniel forwarded me copies of the restitution payments she had begun making under court supervision. They were not large, sometimes only a few $100s, occasionally a little more. The amounts barely made a dent in what had been taken. But every payment represented something I had never seen from Claire during the darkest months of our conflict. Responsibility. She had found full-time work as an office administrator at a medical supply company nearly 40 minutes outside Richmond. The position paid far less than the lifestyle she once enjoyed, but according to Daniel, she had accepted it without complaint. She had also entered counseling voluntarily. Not because a judge ordered it. Because in her own words, she no longer trusted the person she had become. I appreciated the effort. I did not mistake it for redemption. One October afternoon, Daniel called. Claire would like to meet. I looked out the kitchen window. Emma was outside helping Luis replace sections of his old fence. What does she want? She didn't say. Then why should I come? Because she agreed to your conditions. Months earlier, after much thought, I had given Daniel a list. No meetings in private homes, no discussions about inheritance, no requests for money, no emotional pressure. If we ever spoke again, it would happen in a public place for a limited amount of time, with no expectation that every wound would suddenly disappear. When? I asked. Saturday. Where? The little cafe beside Riverside Park. The same cafe where Claire had handed me Derek's phone months earlier. Somehow that felt appropriate. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. I reached the cafe 15 minutes early. Old habits die hard. Claire arrived exactly on time. She looked healthier than she had during our last meeting. Not happier. Healthier. She wore simple clothes, no expensive jewelry, and almost no makeup. The diamond earrings Derek had once insisted she wear everywhere were gone. She carried no purse, only a small envelope. She stopped beside the table. Thank you for coming. I nodded toward the empty chair. She sat carefully. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, she slid the envelope across the table. What is this? My latest repayment statement. I already received copies. I know. Then why bring it? Because I wanted you to see that I signed every payment myself. I looked at the papers. Every dollar had been documented. She wasn't exaggerating. I've sold my jewelry, she spoke quietly. The boat. My designer handbags. The vacation condo. I raised an eyebrow. You owned a vacation condo. She gave a humorless smile. You'd be surprised what Derek convinced me was normal. I folded the statement and returned it. I didn't ask you here to discuss finances. I know. Silence settled again. Finally, Claire looked directly at me. I've spent months trying to understand something. What? The day I posted your obituary. She swallowed. I kept asking myself how I became capable of doing that. I waited. My therapist asked a question that changed everything. What question? When did you stop seeing your mother as a person? Her eyes filled with tears. I couldn't answer. I realized. She looked down at her hands. I had turned you into an obstacle. I stopped seeing your fears, your loneliness, your grief after Dad died. I only saw what I thought I deserved. I listened quietly. She continued. I kept comparing my life to yours. You and Dad built everything together. I thought I was owed the same security. And when Derek kept saying we would lose everything, she sighed. I convinced myself taking yours wasn't really stealing. It was borrowing from the future. The sentence sounded painfully familiar. I remembered almost those exact words during our confrontation months earlier. You don't believe that anymore. It wasn't a question. No. What changed? Claire smiled sadly. I watched Emma stop trusting me. The answer struck deeper than I expected. Not the investigation. No. Not the possibility of prison. No. She shook her head. The day Emma looked afraid to get into my car. Her voice cracked. I finally understood what I'd done. She wiped away a tear. I hadn't only betrayed you. I had taught my daughter that her own mother could become dangerous. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Eventually, the waitress brought fresh coffee. Neither of us touched it. Claire reached into her coat pocket. I have one more thing. She unfolded a single sheet of paper. What is it? My new will. I looked surprised. I don't own much anymore. She gave a small smile. But I wanted you to know something. She slid the document toward me. Everything she still possessed would pass directly to Emma if anything happened to her. No conditions, no control, no complicated provisions, just a straightforward bequest. I can't undo what I did. She looked at me steadily. But I can stop repeating it. I believed she meant it, not because of the paper, because she hadn't asked me to praise her for it. After another long silence, she finally asked the question she had been avoiding all morning. Will you ever forgive me? The calf suddenly seemed very quiet. I answered honestly. I don't know, she nodded. I expected that. I can tell you this. She looked up. I don't wake up every morning hoping you suffer. Tears filled her eyes. I don't spend my days planning revenge. I don't tell people to hate you. I've left that behind, she cried silently. But forgiveness, I took a slow breath, isn't a gift I can force into existence. She nodded again. I understand. No. I smiled sadly. I think for the first time you actually do. As we stood to leave, Claire surprised me once more. She didn't ask for a hug. She didn't reach for my hand. She simply said, I'll see you next month. I watched her walk toward the parking lot. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no miraculous healing, no emotional embrace while strangers applauded. Real life rarely works that way. Healing wasn't built in grand speeches. It was built one truthful conversation at a time, one honest payment, one accepted consequence, one respected boundary. As I drove home, I realized something unexpected. For months, I had feared that forgiving Claire would somehow dishonor Robert's memory. Instead, I finally understood what Robert himself would probably have wanted. Not blind trust, not endless punishment, accountability, truth, and enough hope to leave the door unlocked only after the person outside had learned why the lock existed in the first place. When I pulled into my driveway, Emma was waiting on the porch. How did it go? I smiled gently. It was the first conversation we've had where neither of us pretended the past had never happened. Emma slipped her arm around mine. Is that good? I looked at the home Robert and I had built together. It's a beginning. And after everything we had survived, a beginning was more valuable than promises neither of us could honestly keep. 1 year later, I stood behind a small wooden podium inside the Richmond Public Library. A handwritten sign rested beside me. Living stories, protecting your voice before someone else tries to write it. Nearly 50 people filled the meeting room. Some were retired couples, some were widows like me. Others had come with adult children or grandchildren. A year earlier, I would never have imagined telling strangers the most painful chapter of my life. Now I understood something I hadn't understood then. Silence protects the wrong people. Daniel sat in the back row beside Ruth. Emma occupied the front row, already wearing a sweatshirt from the university she would soon attend. Her college tuition had been restored almost completely after months of court proceedings, recovered assets, and insurance settlements. She had earned scholarships as well. Robert would have been proud, very proud. The room gradually became quiet. I looked at the faces waiting for me. Then I smiled. My name is Frances Bennett. I spent almost 40 years editing other people's stories. I paused. One day, someone tried to write the ending of mine while I was still alive. No one moved. They listened. I didn't describe every legal detail. I didn't list every financial document. Instead, I spoke about trust, about loneliness, about how easily older adults confuse accepting help with surrendering independence. I told them how I had signed a power of attorney because I loved my daughter, how I believed good intentions would always remain good, how dangerous that assumption had become. When I finished speaking, people began asking questions. One gentleman raised his hand. "When did you realize something was wrong?" "The day I read my own obituary." A quiet murmur moved through the audience. A woman near the front asked another question. "Do you still speak to your daughter?" "Yes." The answer surprised several people. "We speak carefully. We meet in public. We tell the truth. And we respect boundaries." Someone else asked, "Did you forgive her?" I thought carefully before answering. "I forgave the possibility that anger could control the rest of my life." I smiled gently. Forgiveness doesn't always restore trust. Sometimes it simply allows your own heart to breathe again. The audience applauded softly. After the presentation ended, several older women remained behind. One quietly admitted her son had recently insisted she transfer her home into his name. Another confessed she had signed documents she never fully understood. A retired schoolteacher asked Daniel for the names of attorneys who specialized in elder protection. As I watched those conversations unfold, I realized something extraordinary. The worst experience of my life had become useful. It could protect someone else. That evening, Emma and I returned home together. She was packing for college in just a few weeks. Suitcases covered the guest room floor. Robert's old fountain pen rested on her desk beside acceptance letters and scholarship certificates. "You nervous?" I asked. "A little." "You'll do wonderfully," she smiled. "I wish Grandpa could see this." I looked toward the framed photograph on the dresser. "I think he can." Emma laughed. "You always say that." "Because I always believe it." She hugged me tightly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up." I kissed the top of her head. "You gave me a reason not to." Several days later, I received an unexpected letter. No return address. Inside was a single folded page. It was from Claire. She didn't ask to meet. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply wrote, "Mom, I've stopped trying to become the daughter I wish people believed I was. Now I'm trying to become the daughter I should have been all along. I know that may take the rest of my life. If it does, then that's the price of my choices. I love you. Claire." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside Robert's old cedar keepsake box. Not beside the legal documents, not beside the court papers, beside family photographs, because despite everything that had happened, she was still my daughter. Broken relationships don't stop becoming family. They simply become relationships that require honesty instead of assumptions. Months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon, I sat alone in my study. The same study where strangers had once packed boxes believing I would never return. Sunlight streamed through the window. My laptop rested open on the desk. Curiosity led me to search my own name online. There it was, the obituary, no longer active, no longer collecting donations. Instead, a notice appeared beneath it, removed following verified false information. For a long time, I simply stared at those words. Then I opened a blank document. Old habits returned naturally. The blinking cursor reminded me of thousands of stories I had edited throughout my career, except this one belonged to me. I titled the document, "When My Time Truly Comes Slowly, I Began Writing." Not about bank accounts, not about court victories, not about betrayal. I wrote about Robert teaching Emma to fish, about Claire learning to ride a bicycle while I ran beside her down our street, about Ruth arriving with soup every winter after my arthritis flared, about Louise replacing broken fence boards without ever sending a bill, about ordinary kindness, because those moments deserve to outlive the worst chapter of my life. When I reached the final paragraph, I stopped. I remembered the sentence Claire had once written, "Rest peacefully, Mom." She had tried to decide how my story ended. This time I chose the words myself. I typed slowly. "If you're reading this after I'm truly gone, don't remember me as the woman whose family tried to erase her. Remember me as the woman who refused to disappear. Remember that love without wisdom can be manipulated. Remember that boundaries protect dignity. Remember that truth often survives because one brave person chooses to speak. I thought about Emma. She had been that brave person. Without her courage, none of us would have found the truth. I added one final sentence. My daughter once wrote the ending of my life before I had taken my final breath. She was wrong. I was still here. And in the end, the final words belonged to me. I saved the document, closed the laptop, then walked onto my front porch. The old oak tree swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Children laughed somewhere down the street. A neighbor waved. Life had become wonderfully ordinary again. And after everything I had survived, ordinary felt like the greatest blessing of all. After everything that happened, I realized that the greatest danger in life isn't always a stranger. It can be the moment we stop protecting our own voice because we believe love alone is enough. Trust is one of the most beautiful we can give, but trust should never require us to surrender our dignity, our independence, or our right to ask questions. Loving someone does not mean handing them complete control over your life. Healthy relationships are built on honesty, respect, and accountability, not silence or guilt. I also learned that forgiveness is often misunderstood. Forgiveness is not pretending the pain never happened, nor is it inviting someone back into your life exactly as they were before. Real forgiveness begins when we stop allowing someone else's choices to control our future. Sometimes forgiveness comes with boundaries, legal documents, locked doors, and difficult conversations. Those boundaries are not signs of bitterness, they are acts of wisdom. They protect the peace we fought so hard to rebuild. Most of all, I learned that truth has extraordinary strength. Lies may travel quickly. They may convince neighbors, friends, even courts for a little while. But truth has something lies never possess. It can survive the passage of time. All it takes is one brave person willing to speak, one honest witness, one piece of evidence, or one act of courage to begin bringing light into the darkest situation. In my story, that courage came from a granddaughter who refused to stay silent. Never underestimate how much difference one honest voice can make. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? Do you believe forgiveness is possible without restoring the relationship, or do trust and forgiveness always have to go together? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read them because every life carries a story worth hearing. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about family, resilience, justice, and hope, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support allows these stories to reach more people who may need a reminder that no matter how painful life becomes, your voice, your dignity, and your story still belong to you.